And one.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing a very special event. We'll be celebrating the release of John Ashbery's posthumously published collection, Parallel Movement of the Hands, 5 Unfinished Longer Works, edited by Emily Skillings, a poet who worked as Ashbery's assistant for many years. We have Emily with us here tonight, along with a formidable panel of thinkers and writers, some of whom were very close with Ashbery during his life. In Emily's introduction, she notes the influence that film had on Ashbery's work, showing how his poems were riddled with references to movies. In interviews, Ashbery himself has remarked upon film's profound impact on his writing. So it seems appropriate to open with a quote from one of Andrei Tarkovsky's movies, a quote that I believe embodies the timelessness of these unfinished works. In Tarkovsky's Stalker, the main character reflects on the importance of vulnerability. He exclaims, "Let them believe in themselves and be helpless like children, because gentleness is a great thing and strength is nothing. When a tree is growing, it is tender and pliant, but when it's dry and hard, it withers." Hardness and strength are mortality's companions, while pliancy and gentleness are expressions of the freshness of being. In these unfinished works, there's an open-ended pliancy that indeed invigorates the reader. We follow along with Emily's annotations, but there's no final closure and no final guide. To finish is nothing, Ashbery wrote, and there's the sense that this collection grows with each time that you return. The freshness of being blooms brighter with every reading of this book. So thank you so much to all of our guests for being with us here tonight. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand it on over to Emily Skillings.
Oh, thank you so much to everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this book. Oh, there I am. Hi, to celebrate this book. I'm just so grateful to everyone on the panel and everyone at Echo and everyone at 192 Books. Everyone participating in this panel tonight was not only instrumental in the making of this book, but was a dear friend to John Ashbery, whom we all miss so much. So it's so special to see all of these people gathered here. I want to especially thank Todd Colby for connecting me with 192 Books for this event. 192 Books was one of Ashbery's favorite bookstores in the city, and his Chelsea apartment was only an avenue away. So I'm especially thankful to everyone at 192 Books, to Peter, Victoria, Evan, and Paula Cooper for everything they've done to make tonight happen. This book began a little over 3 years ago when, after Ashbery's death, I was helping to pack up his papers and came across the two major projects in this book: The Art of Finger Dexterity, which is a suite of 28 poems written in 2007, titled after the exercises in a pedagogical composition by the Austrian composer Karl Czerny, and the Kane Richmond Project. And I came across these in a file drawer, and I was so excited by what I saw. And then the rest of the poems are found not in Ashbery's archives at Harvard, but in his homes. And this was important to me because they had been lived with and set aside, but not sent away. One of the great blessings, I'm also really, really fortunate to have Farnoosh Fathi here tonight, who was so instrumental in the early editing of this book. Farnoosh was one of the first people that I showed these manuscripts to. So having her here is so special. And all of her guidance and editorial insight from working with original manuscripts is so present in this book. So thank you to Farnoosh. And to Thea, Farnoosh's cat. His tail just although you can't see that. So one of the great blessings of working with Ashbery was not only getting to know him and being in the presence of one of the most kind, gentle, quick-witted, funny, and brilliant people who has ever existed, but being welcomed in by and getting to know his friends who've become my friends in turn. Now getting to remember John through them is an incredible gift that just keeps happening. So thank you. I also wanted to thank David Kermani, without whom this project would not be possible in so many ways. David has been so supportive from the beginning, and the estate has really just supported this book at every turn. And also David's organization of Ashbery's papers made editing them so much easier than it would have been. I also want to thank Roseanne Wasserman, who was my incredible advisor on this project, and her husband, Eugene Ritchie, Marcella Durand, and all the team at ECHO, including Dan Halpern, Gabriella Dube, and Martin Wilson. So our first reader tonight is the amazing Adam Fitzgerald, who is one of my dearest friends in the whole world, and who I love with my whole heart, and who I met through John Ashbery in 2010? Is that right?
You're children back then.
They were so instrumental in guiding me through this book. So I'm so excited that they are here tonight, and they're going to be reading a little section of the book. Adam Fitzgerald is the author of the poetry collections The Late Parade and George Washington, both published by Liverite. They teach creative writing at Rutgers University and live in Chelsea. Hi, Adam.
Hey, how you doing, Emily? And hey, everyone. I'm so incredibly happy and surprisingly calm, but I'm sure my body can change that at any moment. It's just so great to be here celebrating John, who we all loved and do love so dearly, his work included. And I just want to congratulate Emily again on this beautiful book, which I can't wait to have a hardcover version of. And Farnoosh and Michael and John and Roseanne and Dara and all the people and David who just kind of like poured their support into this project. I know many hands are something to do anything. So I just want to read a few short poems from a sequence that's in the middle of the book. It's known as The Art of Finger Dexterity. There are a bunch of shorter numbered poems. I think Dara might be reading some of the earlier and later ones. I'm going to try not to overlap. And I just realized, even though I should have realized this sooner, that these poems were written in 2007. So this would have been the exact time that I met John and was working for him as a kind of inept assistant up in Hudson, New York. And so I'm just so happy to read them and share them. And I've never read them out loud before. So the first one, for those who have the book, which was probably only us, is on page 66, and it's called Minor Scales at High Speed. Sorry, no, it's called, sorry. No, I'm not reading that one. It's on page 68. It's called Tense Positions with a Peaceful Wrist. And I'm going to go from backwards forwards because that feels very left-handed. If New England resembled Bulgaria, both would look like this bookcase that stands so moderately, like a birthday, things seen from right to left. And in that case, possession, 9 points of the, would inject its other meaning. Is this in fact Brazil, which all foreign countries resemble, even the United States? If not, let us hide our toes, fall backwards into stagnant ether that is what rises at the end of all days, of all voyages in and from the parlor. We must translate what is tense into peaceful outcomes that will ripple back to foreign origins, not wishing to know the name for what happened or why we connived at it, only that all points are equidistant and pleased, and part of summer, the part of you that got on with it. Love that ending, really gorgeous. The next poem I'm going to read is one page before it on 67. It's called Crossing the Hands Naturally and with a Fine Touch. The fat ride once over dwindled to taxonomy. And what of the reader, she asked, and it was good to have done so. Now everybody knew everybody else. It was like living outdoors, forms emulating forms for all to see. In a minute, rain changed the perspective. There was a crinkling of names, a bleating from offshore as the dance of the fathers came to unroll. The sons and sons-in-law began to see a point in this changeover, until now only a foretaste of whatever wicked weather was to come. God freed up rolling stock. The procession divided itself among cannons and luster. Fragments of pokiness floated on the summer wind like cringing stallions. It was all the random lovers needed to enlarge on fireweed and infatuation. Also a really lovely poem. So now I'm going to skip back a few pages to page 61. This is a kind of shorter poem, or shorter line poem rather, called Maximum Velocity, and I quite liked it. And a lot of these poems, I don't know them as well as Emily does, or I hope to know, but they're certainly about playing and fingers and hands, and there's kind of a theme of the left hand running through a lot of these poems. And John was left-handed, as was my father, in case you wanted to know. So Maximum Velocity. Clarity pursues us like being ashamed on a bridge. No two people feel the same about it, and the slime underneath, anxious refrain of a too terribly old tune, old-time music, something like that. Like my arm giving up its shape like a forgetting water, the piles will discourage any apt forager or soldier on his day off seeking a clue that will give this all away someday, or maybe not. Not enthralled to someone's resolution for a something day not recommended to us. I say, bring in the solution, whether a candle or mended stars not too far off our path around the shore. Please be this visitor who sees, not the one who tended a vitamin shop on the edges, rolling or coming around. If frazzled dimwits are intensity, so be it. Land ho. In your memo, faltering to one plain dissatisfaction, be not distemper. Why, that is the course, and what ravines on a mere repetition of inconvenience, something to be sidled by. That was the point of our opposition, to achieve the same bend under rivers of glare. Lovely, right? I mean, what's not to like about that? So just two more. This one is a really stunning poem called Flexibility of the Left Hand, and it really starts going after that left-handedness. It's on page 60. Whatever our time enjoyed was all right, good to take along, but the botched time, warts and all, pitched us on a curve out of the blue. Here, though, we are seeming to be in control. The light dances, people move along, the street is here, is ours. You pour some coffee. Soon it will be a slightly later time, and that will be good for us. We cannot see us emerging from the traffic light, only that we know where we are on to. In that so much is born, is said, and it will all capitalize on our nerves. Exit smiling. None of them was singular. You'll have to leave that goat. Sometimes it falls where it wants to, prequel. Sometimes it dwells on the dormers of suicidal understanding. That's how we first figured a way out of it. But then we were magically back inside, almost with having mood. That's what it wanted to do to us, but didn't dare at first. Then it was as if everything happened. So it was that our druthers descended to us at the back door to a story. We were finished and knew it, but like as not, we didn't know it, and were unfinished, a work of art. That and so much else. Calmly, we note that here. It is merry, yet the tide comes in on precise steps, and that is to be how we know. It's one of my favorite poems in the book. I think it's just amazing. And I'm just going to finish very quickly with this short poem called Light Articulation of the Left Hand on page 54. It has an epigraph from Wallace Stevens' poem called Things of August. He could understand the things at home. Scribbled on the expansive mist, the desire of many dwindles to us in our activities, wholesome or otherwise. Soon it becomes apparent that neither they nor I have any price on the Fablio's demand of unity. We are aching neither here nor there. The tent caterpillars shrug off the tent and proceed. Was there a maxillary half buried in the silt? If so, what were we doing in earth heaven? Times came to be, trembled on the tilt of a sword's point, and slid off into the grass. See, there is no warranty. It's not like stuff you send away for and it comes and you can't remember why you ordered it. These, our time, were like grain, necessary and inedible. In time, The minute palace got chucked. We were standing on the green, putting, putting, and our recollections came to resemble history. Serious, but not too serious. Redundant, and so on. Thanks.
Much, Adam. That was such a beautiful reading, and I was so happy to be reminded of John's left-handedness. I always loved watching him write freehand for that reason, and it was so amazing to have you here as the person I talk to most about John's poetry and John. So next up we have the wonderful Farnoosh Fathi, who, as I said, was the first person that I showed these manuscripts to, and was so instrumental in the early editing stages of this book. I'm so grateful to her, and who worked closely with John in editing her book of Joan Murray's poems, as John was, as we know, a huge admirer of Murray's work. Farnoosh Fathi is the author of Great Guns from Canarium, editor of Joan Murray Drafts, Fragments, and Poems from New York Review Book Poets, and founder of the Young Artist Language and Devotional Alliance. Hi, Farnoosh.
Hi. Hi, Emily. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Emily. Yes, it's such an incredible honor to be here. Thank you for your generous spirit and words. Thanks to 192 Books and to Echo and to everyone here on the panel. I'm honored to be here today, and also special thanks to David Kermani as well for all he's done to help bring this book about. But I just want to congratulate again. I hope everyone congratulates Emily on this beautiful book that she's done, which is a really exquisitely really exquisite example of how to make a book that's really loving and really spacious, and so generously attributes itself to John's spirit and his work, and it's such a personal and special book. I think it's a really rare thing, this book, and has largely to do with Emily and everything she brings to it, all her insights from working with and learning from John, and from her being a poet. So thank you so much, Emily. I'm going to read one poem from the Joan Murray book, which is how I had the huge also honor of just getting to work with John and meet him and David and work with Emily. So I'm going to read one poem from her, and it's untitled. Sleep, little architect, it is your mother's wish that you should lave your eyes and hang them up in dreams. Into the lowest sea swims the great sperm fish. If I should rock you, the whole world would rock within my arms. Your father is a greater architect than even you. His structure falls between high Venus and far Mars. He rubs the magic of the old and then peers through. The blueprint lies the night, the plan, the stars. You will place mountains too when you are grown. The grass will not be so insignificant, the stone so dead. You will spiral up the mansions we have sown. Drop your lids, little architect. Admit the bats of wisdom in your head. So, and then I'm going to read just the first section of the first poem in this book called The History of Photography. And Emily will read the last section. So kind of read the beginning and the end. First takers, first makers. The first sip of intelligence splits the diapered sky, already crackled with the losses that events are. At the old treehouse, one is clogged with sleep in any case. Dust garlands that sway like chains of mice. And up from under the palaver, there is golden food. So let it be clean at least. The first person to be photographed was a man having his boots cleaned. There were others in the same street, but they moved and became invisible. How calm I am. Baron de Meyer saw the horse, and it too moved on. Nor was the lesson of satin lost on him. It all came to seem a big joke, his cake. Besides, who would care a little later on? Not the house dog. The twig of coal? Not the letterhead, though it is preserved, shining where tool cannot undress the bored leg under the table. It is all a fancy. How could I have had such a good idea? But you know, the way they all say is a barrel, times two and too much. I have been coming and going a fair share of my life, and some of me is up there, photographed. Like a chair, listening to a Victrola record, I experience too little and know too much for the good of others and their bathing suits. Then too, as much escapes me as a tailor's dummy in a photograph by Atget, taking in everything and nothing, which caused the rain to fall one day. Another day was fine. We were bent on pleasure. Sure enough, a skiff comes round a bend in the Thames, a glory in progress. And we haven't even to see these men, small as pickerel in the darting black, for it's hum to come to infest us too. And buildings rise, one behind the other. That is the festivity in this sense, but it's all like lace paper doilies, alludes. Meanwhile, another man spoke to me about a pocket watch. I have it here in my pocket and can choose to let it go. And when all is said and won, this one is let go. Dominated by fools, he was desecrated for a time, then came of age in autumn, just as the flocks of purple storks were taking off for another climate. He ranted and was let go, recanted and was let off. The slow burn is thus the face's fixture, what it needs and has to tell. Everyone understands that as a convention, born to pester, yet never released, never owned up to. Oh, but I could call you and you'd come over. Never made a dime at this swamp, and some liken it to haze, as distance is draped in the mind of the feeling man, who then gets his share of surmise and stumbles off to bed, a fool in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Farnoosh. Oh, the diapered sky is my favorite. Thank you for that beautiful reading and for all the parts of you and your work that are in this book. So thank you so much. I'm going to read the last part of the history of photography, which is a poem that I love because, you know, John uses photography and advancements in early photography as a kind of tether, but then is able to digress and return. And one of the things that I love so much about this poem is that there's a kind of mirroring in the beginning of ending. So Farnoosh just read the beginning, which begins first takers, first makers, and then you'll hear in the end there's a kind of recalling of that beginning. And I'm beginning on the end of page 35. Everywhere you looked, two-souled recruits stammered eulogies to the Four Seasons, then burnt their initials into the trunks of the birch forest with a magnifying glass. It seemed a hallucinatory way of saying goodbye or hello. Both were pretty much the same by now. What had changed was the passage connecting them. So many doubts aired, yet the air came on always, fresh and sweet, and fruits stood far off and geometric, as though no human hand had plucked them. Yet they were there and ready for table consumption whenever the dinner gong should choose to resonate. Yet the froth of activity before mealtimes crowded the pellucid element, frosting it slightly. What would it be this time, was the implication. In any case, a surprise, since they usually go over pretty well, even the unpleasant ones, on account of leaving an exiguous space for human dignity to adjust itself, verify its talons, its coiffure. Easy learner, easy burner. The first photographers who got it right knew what they were doing. Then a second generation came along, happy to play in the ruts already carved, to flood them and conceal them under flowers. Finally, I think there was a generation of downright fakers, though no one is too sure about this. Then, just before our now, things got really interesting and information was communicated to the eye and brain, which relished it and proceeded to write in great octavo notebooks, poems and things like that, excuses, elegies, love notes to the laundryman. When they finally broke into now, having lost the combination, all was confusion and unfinished business. Some got up to stare or turned to hide or faced the profusion squarely, difficult as it was to do without a precedent. Tattoo parlors and the loges of theaters emptied out. A great running was in the streets of a soon-to-be seeing. But then that was all, and there was also more to come, a diffident brightness on our side, a long purple pyramid across the river that asks and reshapes its nutty question. That's how we got to be old timers, why we stay on here. The pictures are good, the air is fine, the nectar and food are fine, the sisters are fine and resolute. Yeah. So I am going to, am I visible on the screen right now? Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay. I am going to read a little bit from the last manuscript in the book, which is a manuscript, a book-length poem that's in little sections, kind of an homage to the form of serial cinema and serial movies. And the poem kind of stars the serial actor Kane Richmond, here he is, who, as you can see, is just a total dreamboat. And I think that might have been one of John's primary interests in him. And he's so beautiful. And this is him in the 1942 serial Spy Smasher, which makes quite an appearance in the Kane Richmond project, this longer work. Another serial of Richmond's that comes up is this serial called The Adventures of Rex and Rinty, which also stars Rin Tin Tin Jr. And Ashbery loved Rin Tin Tin. And so I'm going to read this section from kind of the middle of the manuscript on page 133 that kind of introduces Kane Richmond and his personality, and you'll hear a lot of other references in it. So Kane was a righteous dude, heat packing, cared nor for right or wrong, rode east, rode west, home's best, he smiled. But indeed, where was home? Someplace under the sky's petals, attuned to harmony? He preferred the poetry of Charlotte Mew to that of Nathalia Crane, sang in the shower while the radio poured discord about not believing in the Bible or in hell more precisely. Heaven's chancy if you're saving someone from evil's clutches, less so if you're not thinking about anything in particular, on a day just like the others, receding like cumulus into the forever. He was damned if he knew. Oh, just another thing about Kane Richmond is that he's a Nazi bashing superhero. So that's all the Nazi references in here. He liked the smell of horse shit and sagebrush, chaparral, went about his business with really nothing to spare left over. Nobody ever knew if he got horny or didn't let on if they did. Louise would ask him, why don't you come back in? Those Nazis aren't coming back since you smashed them. To which he'd reply, better to stay on guard for the simple things that defy the imagination, sift through it like chaff through corn silk. Oh, I'll just stay on here a while, I guess. Now there were loud ones clouding up again, ready to erupt in a furious squall. When the tension was diverted by a stray jackrabbit or other sign of activity, even mental. The sky was dark as coagulated blood. Hallelujah, they must think I'm daft not to notice what's going on behind here. I think I'll fake a snooze, and then. These were to be his last words for some time. The BBC operator scowled, then softly cursed. It was a dark day for Bletchley. Wait, though. Through the crackle and hiss, a voice could be made out. Avast, ye slobs, espace d'ordure. Then all was silence again, silence of the English Channel. In the map room of the Imperial War Museum, in a cellar somewhere in Paris, the scratchy sounds of the TSF had made their point, though. We'll be coming out of this just as soon as fate allows. Meanwhile, patience and strength must be our watchwords. He smiled, expiring faintly. The Nazis grinned and were glad. Soon it would be time to break out the champagne again. Cain was lost in the metro, somewhere between Plaisance and Pernity. Far from others, he assuaged a certain need, felt better for it. The treetops and stars danced and dwindled from gateway to lounge. Blandest of ghouls, the sergeant thought to turn the situation to his advantage yet again. Born in Milwaukee, I grew up in central Illinois with little to show for it. My college education left much to be desired. Life in Montmartre was twice as nice. Lord forgive me for the occasional breach of bathroom etiquette. I soldier on. Memories of misbehavior were still fresh in their minds. They puzzled over a chart thought to be of importance. Boys and girls came out to play. A little indifference goes a long way toward the coquetry of the sublime. This delightedness under the summer sky is theirs, if they but want it, really and truly. The moon doth shine as bright as day, after all. And then they die, and then they keep on dying, and then said nothing more. One of the things I love about that poem is the many film references that are just kind of sprinkled throughout and just keep cropping up. Every time I go to this text, I find a new one. And so it's really John's love letter to cinema. And I had this kind of fantasy that he was watching Turner Classic Movies, as he did all the time, while he was writing this long poem, and kind of just peppering it with all these amazing references. And the person that I think of when I think of Ashbery and cinema is John Yao, who is our next reader, and often went to the movies with John. John Yao was such an amazing advisor on this project in so many ways, and was so generous with his time. And so I'm so grateful that he is here tonight. John Yao is a poet, fiction writer, critic, and publisher of Black Square Editions. His reviews have appeared in Art Forum, Art in America, Art News, Book Forum, the New York Times, and the Los Angeles Times. He was the arts editor for the Brooklyn Rail from 2006 to 2011 and is an associate editor of the online arts magazine Hyperallergic Weekend. The author of over 50 books, his recent works include the poetry collection Bijou in the Dark and a new book of essays, Foreign Sounds. His current project is a monograph on Joe Brainerd, and he lives in the Garment District neighborhood in New York City. Please welcome John Yao.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to read from the Kane Richmond Project, and I'm going to read a small section from the piece called There You Go. And I don't want to read the whole thing. I want to kind of leave you either in the dark or the light, depending on what you want. And you'll see why I have to begin with this sentence. It's on page 168. It could be a Chinese funeral for all the notice they were taking of each other, each involved in a solemn gesture like a transparent jar that left no room to speculate on where the others might have been left. It always comes as a shock to realize that there aren't any, that this is always a lonely place, not even created by God, so you can't call it God forsaken. Just like that, lonely and a little formal, which stands out in such a wilderness, the way a hitching post would stand out in the Gobi Desert. You know, it's not meant for you to notice, but still, there's a hushed deliberateness about it that's not the same as the regular emptiness that passes slowly by like a conveyor belt with nothing on it, nothing to convey except the idea that this could be something if the light of the world would let it. And yet, there's a bee, a bunch of them. Must be a whole storm of them come drifting in like the sea all of a sudden, and you are made to understand that the sea is someone's property, that everything belongs to someone, even if that someone doesn't know about it, unconscious or long dead and buried ages ago. Promise me, sea, you'll reveal your owner's name. Oh, we're just waves, whatever they are, no belonging, no being. But the faint throbbing, that must be art, the kind that reveals nothing, no dead longings, just a still life a child might draw. But I thought the finished art notion was supposed to stick around and be something, a hat or something. That's the enthusiastic part of it. Imparts pep, makes you want to get up and leave. Yes, well, all right, it does do that. You're right. And so now it may be time for you to leave. You'll know something somehow. Yes, but the thinking part, I like that. I kind of like to think about thinking. And so you shall. And you may never have to go anywhere. But I kind of like the idea of travel. It gets you different places. You think about them and come back, and you have had what I call an experience. The children's dresses may grow other places, topsy-turvy winds funnel the spruce branches. The library stuck on piles of steps too high for anybody to climb. Waves bang against the shore with a dreadful lack of enthusiasm. We could stay here and dream about these, but inasmuch as we've seen them, it behooves us to stay here and reflect. Reflecting. Isn't that the most important thing a human can do? Look at how a pond reflects trees, imperfectly perhaps, yet as perfectly as it knows how. And the little mistakes in the reflection are what makes it charming and nice. Gives stealth to what would otherwise be a random picture of choice. Surely this is the reason we're all drawn to art and why art loves us. And if anything were any different, that is more or less perfect, it would have the same hold over us. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That's such an amazing section.
Yeah, it is.
I love that. I love that bee that turns into the ocean.
Yep.
Next is one of John Ashbery's closest and dearest friends, Dara Wier, and I'm just so thrilled that she is here this evening with us, and going to be channeling a little bit more Carl Czerny through these poems. Some poems from the book will also be in the final issue of Jubilat, which Dara shepherded for many years. So I'm very grateful for that too. Thank you, Dara. Dara Wier's 15 books include Tolstoy Killed Anna Karenina, what a title, forthcoming from Wave Books in 2022. In the Still of the Night, You Good Thing, and selected poems from Wave. Wier's poetry has been supported by fellowships and awards from the Lannan Foundation, Guggenheim Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Poetry Center, and American Poetry Archives, and the American Poetry Review. She is publisher and editor of the small independent press Factory Hollow Press, and from 2015 to 2021 was the publisher of literary journal Jubilat, beloved journal Jubilat. She lives and works in Western Massachusetts. Please welcome Dara Wier.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with all of you. I was going to read the poems that Emily was so generous to let us put in Jubilant, but while I was obsessively thinking about the poems that are in the art of finger dexterity in general, I was looking at a brilliant thing Emily did, which was include some of the original typescripts of the poems that are noted by what looks to me like David Kermani's hand. Oh, I also think that the dedication of the book is beautiful. It's dedicated to David Kermani and to the memory of John Ashbery. And I think that's a very nice beginning of the book. And I noticed that there were two poems in the book, in the section I was going to read, that were written exactly yesterday and today in 2007. And they so happen to be parallel movement of the hands. So how could I not read those poems? It's it gave me chills when I saw those dates written down on the bottom of the page. And so I'm going to read those two poems now. They're 21, parallel movement of the hands, 1. Don't put me on the desk. I was afraid I was going to die very soon on a paper spree. Any nice person will die very shortly. It doesn't really fit. A missing dog or donkey registered does the American State Police talk show no favors. Just as in the past, you coaxed belligerent sweetness from the hedge, and then it was gone. Color? Why no color? What did you expect from the microtonal overlap of minutes? And then when it did stand up, it was like nothing you ever imagined. There was an unshapely tuft where the chimes rang, and forever after it was solid wall. Nothing so became it as its tiresome leave-taking. We were all pretty much dispatched to our different sectors when the truth happened and bombed yet again. What registers no vibration can expect to be named a consequence or co-respondent if the peaceful enemy is really coming back to engage the shares that were laid down ages ago and are now indistinguishable from gaps in the truth. See here, it seems to say, this is the consequence, though not inconsequential. And all of what was first only by dreaming itself into position. It's funny about dreams. They happen pretty much everywhere. That's why you can't ever be sure you're in one or out of it. Why the rules of assembly never apply to you in the present, only later, when the color of time being is finished anyway. And the second is also called Parallel Movement of the Hands. 2. Saw him running, a sunken wraith. Rather than figuring it all out in 1 hour, pull the mud out from under him. Whether that explains the Treaty of Hubertusburg or this or that spring wardrobe, it's my placebo with all the trimmings, the way we and others like it, just so it belongs to us and them. Granted, a day of catching up, we could work within the barriers foreign trade imposes on our purpose-built big casino, gazebo, your and our place, gliding across the keys, mindlessly in a penance a dream imposes. Otherwise, where are they going to get backing for the shift in ways of thinking that lead invariably to your correct address, pulling your house and delusions with it into the stream? If it's that, then I endorse it. Our citizenry, commonwealth, society, all rowing frantically away from today's mischief as from a wreck in real time, never to congratulate anyone again on the light that emerges to bathe us that we bear no responsibility for, and our felicity. The wind blows where it wants. The wind will carry it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Dara, so much. And thank you for pointing out that that poem that you just read was written 14 years ago today. It's so incredible.
Oh, it makes me so happy.
Oh, what an amazing thing to notice. Our final guest who will also be moderating the Q&A is Michael Silverblatt. And I'm so thrilled that Michael is here because he knows Ashbery's body of work inside and out. And he's also an interviewer who was able to really have Ashbery open up on several occasions about his work, which was no small feat, as John was famously a little bit recalcitrant to discuss the meaning of his poetry. So it's such an honor to have you here tonight, Michael. Michael Silverblatt is the host of KCRW's Bookworm, a nationally syndicated radio program showcasing writers of fiction and poetry. Joyce Carol Oates once called him the reader writers dream about, and I think that's so true. As host and guiding spirit of this weekly show, Silverblatt has reinvented the art of literary conversation, introducing listeners to new and emerging authors, along with writers of renown. Describing his interviews as conversations, Silverblatt has hosted hundreds and hundreds of celebrated writers. So thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Emily. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I can't tell you what a profound effect on my reading life John Ashbery had. The first time I was recommended to read John Ashbery was by Donald Barthelme, who considered him to be the best writer in America. It took me, I'm going to confess it, 6, 7, maybe 8 years to learn how to read John Ashbery. He was the major poet after T.S. Eliot. And if T.S. Eliot required that you learn and reference every little reference, John Ashbery was the opposite. He was writing poetry that had to be taken on its own behalf. You weren't going to be able to explain it until you came to know it. Knowing it was its own explanation. He was a magnificent figure, and I first met John Ashbery and David Kermani at the house of John Yao. I have to say, I fell in love with both of them. I wanted to go home with both of them. It was snowing. I'll never forget them. And I am so very thrilled that when John appeared on my show, Bookworm, this was the first time that he not only, that I know of, read a poem, he explained it line by line. And when David asked him, why did you do that? I've never heard you do that before. John said, well, Michael has read all my work and everything I've ever read. How could I not? It was so generous of him. It was an amazing thing to me because I have to confess that I read every book John Ashbery ever mentioned, whether it was the novel Hebdomeros by the painter Giorgio de Chirico, everything. He had special books. He had read Ivy Compton Burnett as part of his thesis at Columbia. He had read Henry Green. Anything Ashbery mentioned, I read immediately. Here, what I'm about to read is one of the early experiments in prose. The general title is Sacred and Profane Dances. The title in specific of this section is called Tempest. Tempest does not refer to the Shakespeare play. There is a character in this piece whose name is Tempest. It begins with one of Ashbery's experiments in dialogue. The first two words, poor Claire. But she wanted him to leave her. That was the point. It has always been the point with Claire. Not to fail honestly would be to fail indeed, and failure is something she doesn't acknowledge even to herself. As usual, Tempest's strands were many. In conversation, she was like a fisherman with a number of lines which she was constantly checking to see if some unlucky bullhead or catfish might have gone for the bait. But the little painted floats remained imperturbably placid on the current's mirroring surface. Surely Nathan could have done something. The point, the rest of the point, Elaine's tone grew a touch grim. She was fast beginning to weary of their topic, as well as of Tempest's predictable analysis of it, though she was too good a friend to acknowledge it, even to herself. The point has always been for Nathan not to know. That way, a brother can be flesh and blood, and Nathan has always been a bit too much of both, and still remain a statue, an equestrian statue of a lover, or Perseus, someone who's on his way to the rescue and who never budges, and whose credentials therefore never need to be checked out. Tempest turned toward the multi-paned window and its implied view of water just out of sight below the bluff. The Wildwoods had had their house built to the highest standards of conservative advanced taste in 1882. There had always been a problem with damp, like a remnant of a summer cold. Today, it was positively a presence, a commanding one, in the library, whose volumes of Opie Reed and F. Hopkinson Smith had remained untouched for almost a century and contributed to the temperature and smell. Something would have to be done about it before the billowing glass cross on the walls came down on them like a collapsed circus tent. Not today, though. How odd to think of him with credentials. After all, he's only her brother, only and unimaginably other. Elaine noted something like a catch in Claire's voice and hurried onward. The afternoon was speeding along too, though it seemed endless. That was from Sacred and Profane Dances. I'm going to tell you a very brief story. In the afterword of his book, Alone with America, Richard Howard, the poet and literary critic, asked John Ashbery what he should call his new volume of Alone in America, and Ashbery thrillingly answers, Alone again, naturally. Extraordinary, told by Edmund White that Edmund was writing a book of gay travels in America. Ashbery proposed the title Above the Fruited Plain. Is the essence of Ashbery, and I'm going to ask our readers, beginning with the beloved Emily Skillings, to recall something, an anecdote about Ashbery. Emily, would you start?
Of course, Michael. Thank you so much for that amazing reading of Tempest and for those anecdotes. One of my favorite parts about working with John was taking dictation for correspondence. And I remember he was writing to someone, I'm not sure who, and the person had sent him a bottle of vitamins or supplements or something that had been making this person feel a lot better. And Ashbery is writing them a thank you, and in it he said, I got the vitamins, I haven't opened them yet, but just having them nearby, I feel better almost immediately. and I thought that was such a wonderful kind of indicator of his sensibility, also his humor, right? But that it's like the environment, it's being around things that is important. It's not necessarily taking them in or fully becoming indoctrinated by them, right? It was just having these things in the environment. And I thought that was so funny. Another kind of more personal one day was I came in and there was a copy of New York Magazine out, and I asked him, John, why is this New York Magazine out? And he said, well, I saw this ad for this dress. And I thought it would look so lovely on you. And I circled it. Do you want me to buy it for you? And it was just the sweetest thing. And it just made my day. I declined because it was very expensive, but I just thought it was just such a wonderful thing. And, he was always reading everything. Who else wants to share an anecdote?
Danielle, you traveled with John Ashbery in Europe, visiting sites that appear in Proust's Memories of Things Past. Do you have an anecdote about being with John abroad?
So we were in the hotel in Deauville that Proust stayed in, and we were in the restaurant. And if you look out the window, you could see people walking by on the boardwalk. And he basically quotes from memory the scene of Proust, the character sitting inside, feeling like he's in an aquarium. And he quotes it for like 5 sentences. And then we just waited for lunch or dinner. And then the other thing that he did was he talked about the fact that when he first went there, he had to stay in a room away, not facing the ocean. And so now he was able to go back with David and have a room with the balcony and face the ocean. And he sees a little desk, tiny, and he goes, "Escritor, should I write a poem?" And David just was like, huh? And then the final anecdote I'll say, because it was the first time John and I ever talked about the movies. And he wanted to know if I had seen Heart of Glass. And I said, no. And then he said, oh, there's a wonderful scene in the movie. 2 men go into a bar and they get drunk. And then one man gets very angry at the other one and hits him over the head with a beer mug and kills him. And he's just sitting there upset that his friend is dead. And then he said, and then after a minute, he decides that he should dance with him, and he picks him up and they dance. And then John classically pauses for about 3 seconds because you wonder, what's he going to say about this? And he goes, I've never seen that in the movies before. 2 men dancing. One of them is dead, and that was it.
Dara Wier, you had something that I'm very envious of, the opportunity to visit with John along with James Tate. Do you remember anything in particular that occurred during one of those visits? I know that Ashbery had James Tate's poems piled up on his desk in the room he wrote in New York. And I'm curious, you were probably the 2 closest poets to him during that time. Tell us about that.
When we were told yesterday that it was going to be called upon to tell an anecdote, of course, I started thinking and worrying and obsessing about all of it. And it became very clear to me, something that I should be, I guess, ashamed to admit, that I'm not able to shape into words anything that I would think anybody would count as an anecdote about John, because everything I think about him is a very, very long story. And it would take me a half an hour to tell you something about any of the stories that I have really to tell. I think that his curiosity and his genius and his generosity and his sweetness was his smile, his eyes, his gap in his tooth You know, everything about him is so strong and vivid in a way that I can't crunch it into a tiny thing. I wish I could. Maybe if we had all night, you could pull it a lot out of me, I'm sure. But meanwhile, just like his poems make you feel, or make everyone that I know feel, everything's relevant. And it's beautiful to get to be so close to him like I've been the last 2 days because of this, what we're doing now. So that's it.
That's beautiful, Dara. Thank you. Adam Fitzgerald was John Ashbery's assistant prior, I believe, to Emily Skillings. And he is someone who I met primarily because he was close to Ashbery. And at that time, I had no idea what it meant to be close to Ashbery. I had no idea how funny, how kind, how sweet, how generous. And Adam, he was a big influence on you and your work. Tell me what he was like to you.
I'm just, thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone, and for sharing. And Dara, I'm just very moved with what you said. It's almost healing just to hear it, to just remember that it's so important to tell stories, and then it's so important to not try to, you know. But it's so interesting to me about I'm going to try not to go into a PhD thesis here, but the anecdote as a kind of a shape of language is so strange, because everyone I've ever met who's known John has many, many anecdotes, and John loved to share many anecdotes. And they were this kind of condensation of his wit and his charm and his irreverence. But it was also things he collected about other writers. And it's so strange to me because he had such an incredible memory for it. And at the same time, you know, in his work, he doesn't like to store up biographical detail, at least in any seemingly obvious or recognizable way. So it's this great memoirist of the anecdote. Like Emily Dickinson has this line, kind of like a memoir of evening, a crumb of noon, some kind of fragment where she's just, you know, what would a memoir of the evening be? And John had this amazing ability to retain them. So just a few examples, one of which I'm going to get into a little bit of trouble for sharing. But I was taking John on a car, we were driving around Hudson. And, you know, I said, you know, after I got a little more comfortable being in his presence, which was never fully, truly happened, maybe, but it felt just kind of great all the time. I said, you know, so what was it like to win the Pulitzer? And he told me two things that I've never forgotten. One was, after he won the Pulitzer, Jacqueline Kennedy left a message and called Rochester, New York to speak to Mr. John Ashbery, but got instead his mother. And she left a message with John's mom congratulating him on winning the Pulitzer Prize. And as people know, Jackie O was a huge lover and champion of poetry, and Cavafy and many others. So when he spoke to his mom, she said, you know, someone left a message for you. And he said, oh, who, Mom? It was Mrs. Kennedy. She called to say, you know, about your award. Oh, that's great. Wow, that's amazing. And then his mom said, listen, I don't want you talking with that woman. It was just so incredible. And I said, John, that's just kind of amazing that even exists as a story. And I said, what was it like when you found out that you won the Pulitzer? I mean, was it a letter? Was it a singing telegram? What happened? And lo and behold, John got a phone call from Richard Howard. And Richard, who is a former teacher of mine and Emily's, and you know, is also, there's many great anecdotes about Richard Howard. But one of the most beautiful things I just want to very quickly say is, you know, Richard was one of the first tireless champions of John Ashbery's poetry. In the late 60s, when it wasn't awarded and it wasn't given this and it wasn't given that, Richard wrote a beautiful, beautiful essay about kind of how to read and take it very seriously. Probably maybe even more seriously than John would have wanted to, or maybe not. But so, you know, but they had a kind of, I think, kind of dynamic relationship that included many different emotions. They shared a voyage from between Paris to New York City. But anyway, so Richard Howard called John to say, you know, in Richard's amazingly beautiful, gorgeous Mandarin way, like, I am calling to inform you that you have won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry for self-portrait in a convex mirror. What do you think of that? That was how the phone call opened, not with hello or how are you or are you sitting down? To which John immediately answered, does this mean I have to blow you? and you know, even more than the kind of irreverence of it, it reminds me that John's mind was always like, you thought he was kind of playing possum or not really listening or distracted, but John just was always taking everything in. He was always taking everything in. And last thing I'll just say is, more personally, I, you know, knew that John could be a verbal sparring person, you know? And so one day I kind of came into the house kind of in this crazy, it was snowing madly up in Hudson. And I kind of came into his bedroom and he's like, you know, are you ready to go back out into the blizzard? And I was like, you know, I'm kind of so scared to go outside. I'm feeling like such a wet blanket, John. And John just kind of looked at me and huffed and he's like, you're talking to the original wet blanket. So, and so John is always going to be my original wet blanket. So yeah. And like Dara said, there's thousands of them more, and we should all collect them together on a Google Doc. So, or not, but. Yeah.
I know this question is making me regret it's bringing up this long-term regret that I never took notes while working with John, because it felt like it would somehow like poison something and that I just had to like experience it. But somehow I always regret not taking notes.
Finally, the beloved, excuse me, I'm sorry.
From Farnoosh.
Finally, the beloved Farnoosh, who had the pleasure of working with John Ashbery on a collection of one of John's favorite unrecognized and practically lost poets. What did it mean to work with John Ashbery, Farnoosh?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I'm glad that you phrased it that way in terms of my relationship to John, because I was going to start maybe by just first saying that when you mentioned that you would be asking us for anecdotes, and you know, I can hear from everyone like they have so many anecdotes to share, I sort of felt like, well, I don't really have anecdotes, because I felt my relationship to John was maybe more of something in the dream realm, and it really started with me, you know, never even imagining that I could be, you know, even to get a signature or something at a reading seemed too big of a dream. And I remember like actively having this, like allowing myself to dream the daydream of being a feather duster in his house. That was like for a while it's like, I just want to be a feather duster in his house. If that's possible, then, you know, and so when I thought about why, you know, well, why am I here at this reading? You know, it still feels kind of like dreamlike. It's not, and at the same time, I felt that was a really interesting position to be in relationship to John, because, you know, the few interactions I have with him, which really are just, you know, I can count on a hand, and, you know, 3 of those were looking at Joan Murray's work together, but the interactions I had with him, I feel like maybe they were interactions which we didn't say much, and where I was watching him or listening to him, and where I felt maybe something of what Adam described as him taking in everything, to be in that presence of his attention, the quality of his attention, as someone who had loved his work for about a decade so deeply. It communicated so much to me that, you know, in some ways, you know, I felt like I have a lifetime of experience with him in that dream realm where you get to be in the presence of someone who, you know, is not separating, like the poem Dara read, dreaming from waking, you know, like the dream is happening everywhere. So you can't be sure you're in it, and you can't be sure you're not in it. And so that's a little bit how I feel, like so lucky to have, I mean, it's just wild to have had the chance to go over to his house and to stare at the same page of Joe Murray poems, or, you know, with him, and to notice his sort of acuity, his keenness, his generosity, just everything, you know, everything was fully there in the present moment. He could bring to the present moment everything. And, you know, even when he was in rehab, when he was, you know, dealing with some of his illness, he, you know, called, I had a phone call with him. Emily put through a phone call so that he could share some of his thoughts, because we had sent the manuscripts to him while he was in rehab, and he was in bed and he was sharing, you know, and I can't even recall what it was that we talked about, but I remember that I was crying as I was listening, you know, and so yeah, so I'll just end by saying that, where I continue to have anecdotes with John is that he visits me in dreams, which I don't really have dream visitors, and I can't explain. Again, it's another mystery why I should have any dream visits with John Ashbery. But I want to say that there are always parties, and I'm not much of a party goer, but I know John did. And there are always parties, and they are so wild. And one in particular that I remember is he's there, and it's this, you know, house that's really expansive, and people of all kinds are coming in, and then comes in a train of these cats that are also teenagers. So they're standing like, you know, teenagers with cat heads, and they're dressed as astronauts. And I was like, who are these super cool astronauts? And in their helmets, there were like disco lights and rainbows. And I kind of looked over at John, and he had this look like, oh yes, these are my friends, you know. And that sort of brings me to this last point, which is that I think they are parties that he's visiting, and that I'm allowed to be in the dream of being able to have that with him, because that's the realm in which he was living, you know, not separating, waking from dreaming. You know, there's this word of samadhi, you know, in the Buddhist context, which is means concentration. It also means the place of innumerable meanings, you know, and I think that's where he is now, but I also think that's where he always strove to be, you know. And then that poem, The Task, when he describes, you know, that, you know, there are reaches to be attained, you know, a last level of anxiety that melts like miles under the pilgrim's feet, you know, it tells you about the depth of the dream that he was living. It's not just, you know, like dreaming in the sense of unconscious writing. It's about the reaches to be attained and that constant reaching. And so that's how I feel close to him, is having gotten a sense of that reach.
I love this. I'm going to end by returning the evening to the marvelous Emily Skillings, who edited this final volume of John Ashbery's. This book is called Parallel Movement of the Hands, and I just want to say that it's beautiful to be talking to poets, each of whom in his own way is saying, I don't know what an anecdote is. I'm not sure there is an anecdote. I'm not sure I could tell one. Perfect poetry. And Emily, will you say good evening to us?
Thank you so much, Michael, for shepherding that conversation. And thank you so much to all of you. Farnoosh, that was amazing. I hope we all have a dream with John in it tonight and are at that great party. thank you all so much for being here. And the book is on sale today. So thanks for being here for its birthday. I'm going to hand it back over to Victoria.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for that wonderful discussion. We feel extremely lucky that we had such an intimate glimpse into both Ashbery's work and also Ashbery as the person. It's been a huge privilege to hear you all speak and share your stories. A recording of this event will be posted immediately afterwards. So if you missed the beginning or you missed the event entirely, you want to share it with a friend, it'll be ready immediately after the streaming is over. All of our previous events are available to watch as well on paulacooper-studio.com. If you'd like to reserve Parallel Movement of the Hands, you're free to send us an email at info@192books.com. You can also stop by the shop every day from 11 to 6 and until 7 on Fridays and Saturdays. Also, if you cannot make it down to Chelsea, you're welcome to order it from our bookshop.org page for direct shipment. For any information on upcoming events, sign up for our email newsletter or check out our website, 192books.com. And our next event is in a couple of weeks on Thursday, July 15th. Richard Zenith will be joining us to discuss his new biography of Pessoa, which we are very excited about. So please join us on July 15th. So until next time, and thank you again to all of our guests, and thank you to the audience for joining us. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.